Hi, I'm animation author and historian Mindy Johnson, and welcome to the 2022 Spark International Animation Festival. We are so elated that you've joined us, and we appreciate your continued support for all the vital efforts that are underway here at the Spark teams in 2020, and we're so excited with the Legacy and Legends track. Today I'm delighted to share with you another remarkable session exploring aspects of our collected animated past. And it's my great pleasure to introduce this 25th anniversary celebration event for one of the true gems in the Pixar shorts canon, Geri's Game. Joining us today in celebration of this Oscar-winning short is the writer and director of Geri's Game, Jan Pinkava. Jan, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mindy, and thank you, Keith, also. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's been a wonderful excuse to rummage through my attic and look through all. It's been a beautiful, sentimental journey looking back. Let me dive straight in and talk about Geri's Game.
Let's go.
And let me see if I can share my screen in some intelligent way. So it's 25 years since Geri's Game. He doesn't look 25 years old, but he's only 25. And it's perhaps the best thing is to, for those of you who haven't seen this short film, let's begin by showing it, and then we can talk about how it got made. Here we go. And that's the show. It brings up so many sentimental memories. I'm going to try and trawl through some of those with you today. As I said earlier, an excuse to go through my attic and weep over boxes of wonderful material. Why did I even come to be involved in this at all? Well, it all really goes back to this. Back in the day, I was studying computer science. I was a computer science bachelor's degree candidate, and this came out in 1986. And it changed my mind, my life in all kinds of ways, but not for a while. The BBC did a fantastic show on TV in the Horizon series all about computer graphics, and I saw Bill Reeves of Pixar talking about self-shadowing, and Alvy Ray Smith driving down from the hills of San Rafael talking about how at Pixar we like to let all our people do whatever they want. We find it pays off in the end. Wonderful stuff like that. We said, oh my goodness, this is what I want to do. And for me and for many other people, John Lasseter's short film, Luxo Jr., just changed everything. At the time, I was just about to begin a PhD in theoretical robotics. And that's what I did. I went through a thing all about, the thesis was, I think, entitled A Task-Centered Formalism for Robotic Sensory Requirements Analysis. Don't ask. Meanwhile, these things were happening, and I was paying attention. It was great. Every year, John's team came up with a new film: Luxo, Red's Dream, Tinto. I was even so bewitched by all this that I started writing a Red Unicycle, and it just got crazy. And in '89, I was finishing writing up. The world was changing, really. The Velvet Revolution was happening in Czechoslovakia, my old country where I'm from. The fall of the Berlin Wall, and knick-knack happened. And I finished my PhD, and I didn't know what to do next. And somebody, for some reason, put on my desk a print ad from the Guardian newspaper, which had this following thing on it. Are you the next John Lasseter? Digital Pictures, one of the world's leading computer animation houses, is looking for new talent. This was something that was very strange, because this was before John Lasseter was John Lasseter, before anyone knew who he really was in the big wide world. And so this was actually a piece of genius by Chris Briscoe, the founder of this company, Digital Pictures in London, which is the UK's first specialist computer animation company, identifying the people who were actually interested in this area directly. Anyone who was paying attention to this would know who this person was. And that was a wonderful thing, I thought, of a way of getting to the right people for that ad. I was very impressed. Later on, I found that most of the guys in the company thought it was very cheesy, but I ended up putting this ad framed on my office wall at Pixar. which is another story. It turned out to be a very bad mistake. But anyway, I ended up going to Digital Pictures, this beautiful company in London, and I made, in testing their software, I made a short film called Still Life, which is about a bowl of fruit which comes to life. And it won some awards and it got me the job. We had a great time making commercials and idents and TV stings and all kinds of graphics with people who later on also came to the Bay Area to work in this wonderful new thing called computer animation. People like David Lomax, Nigel Hardwich, Damien Steele, Ewan MacDonald, people who really helped make the production of computer animation what it is today. And when I finished at this company, I sent a resume and a show reel on VHS tape and a resume by email, which was very unusual then, to Ralph Guggenheim at Pixar. And that's where I ended up. Because just then, things were changing very, very rapidly at Pixar, the company that was once upon a time making hardware and was known for photorealistic renderman. And I came into direct commercials, and the first commercial that I directed was the last in a series of spots for J. Walter Thompson advertising Listerine mouthwash. John and Pete and Andrew had done some fantastic versions. The first three were absolutely seminal works in computer animated commercials. Andrew Schmidt did a beautiful one based on Patton. And my commercial, which was called Arrows, it did great, and it won a Gold Clio, the top award in animation in advertising. And so it was a great beginning. And I was there at Pixar as Pixar was transforming from this company into something that became Pixar Animation Studios, because Toy Story was happening. Here's a picture of a bunch of people in our old screening room at Point Richmond. In a Fortune article, I think it was entitled "How Steve Jobs Became a Billionaire," because the company was going public. And you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, this is me with lots of hair. And sitting next to Darla Anderson, who was running the shorts group at the time. And all of these people have so many stories to tell about those wonderful times. And I was the only schmuck in this room, actually, who didn't work on Toy Story. Me and another guy called Ken Huey, who actually has a credit in Tintoy, were the only two people in Pixar Animation Studios who did not work on Toy Story. Because I was crazy for short films. I was very keen on making sure that we continue to make short films, which our great leader Steve was not so happy about, because there's no upside in making short films. And so I was minding the shop while Pixar was making Toy Story in pre-production. And I was banging on Darla Anderson's door saying, let's make a short film, let's make a short film between every commercial. Somewhere in there, Ed Catmull came to me and said, came to Darla and said, "Is this, we should restart the short film program." And one thing that they realized was that they needed to do better humans. This was the state of the art of humans and short films, and there was a long way to go. SIGGRAPH in those days was still talking about synthespians and photoreal humans, but the whole art of making characters in cartoons and in animated films was still, for human characters, was still very difficult. A very different world from where we live today. And Ed said to me, Jan, maybe you can make a short film if it has a good story and it has a human character. Because we at Pixar needed to solve this problem of how to make human characters. It was a very tricky and difficult thing. And the last thing that I was inspired by in human characters was John's film Tin Toy, which legend has it was only partially finished when it showed at SIGGRAPH in 1988. And this baby Billy was scary and very difficult and almost killed people trying to make it, because everything about it was very, very hard. It was just so hard back then, and even in Toy Story times, to do a feasible human character. And there was still a debate about how to approach the thing. And I said, okay, I'd love to do a short film. I had tons of ideas for short films, not a single one with a human character. So never mind, I grabbed the opportunity and I set to work, okay, how are we going to do a human character? Now, I came to this very, very lucky. Not only did I have a bunch of this technical background, but I was born in this town, the most beautiful city in Europe, Prague, and full of art and full of great history in puppetry. One of my heroes was this man, Jiří Trnka. That's again, Jiří Trnka. Very difficult to pronounce. In translation, his name is George Blackthorne. And he was a puppeteer, and he was a genius of animation and a great children's book illustrator back in the bad old days of totalitarian communism in Czechoslovakia, in my old country. He was absolutely towered above everyone else, and he made many, many seminal, brilliant short films and feature films. He made a feature-length film based on Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, a very lyrical, very beautiful, each image wonder. He, like a small handful of state-sanctioned illustrators, created high art for the children of the day in book illustrations of the time. His edition of Hans Christian Andersen's Fables stories was internationally published all over Europe and the world. Here's a picture that used to scare the bejesus out of me from The Emperor and the Nightingale when I was a kid. So Trnka and his work were a great influence, and his illustrations especially, because he must have illustrated at least 100 books. Let me just say one other word about Trnka. Years later, when I was in Berkeley and working at Pixar, after the Iron Curtain fell, Berkeley did a retrospective of Trnka's films. And he was long gone then, but his daughter came to talk about it, and her husband was a famous professor of jurisprudence who was a judge and a lawyer, and he actually was one of the co-authors of the new constitution of Czechoslovakia and then the Czech Republic. And I remember speaking to him, and he said, you know, I'm the guy who wrote the constitution of my country. And people don't remember me as that. People remember me as the husband of the wife of the puppeteer Jiří Trnka. That's how important Trnka was in Czech culture. Generations upon generations of people were influenced by him. And I've never seen a photograph of him smiling. So I did my best to ape Trnka's way of designing characters, because steeped in the traditions of Central Europe of how to do caricatures of humans in three dimensions, and as well as in illustrations. Another great influence, of course, was Honoré Daumier, who for generations of Disney artists reference him as well, the great 19th century French illustrator and caricaturist, who also figured out his drawings and caricatures in three dimensions as sculptures. Now, I'm a big fan of sculpture. I love sculpting. And I dove straight in to making sculptures right at the beginning, figuring out how we could do a character in three dimensions. You've noticed that I decided to do an old man because I was inspired by Tintoy and everything that John had done in the animation of this little baby. I thought, why not try to do the other end of life and have fun as an animator with the way that an old man behaves. And so lots of work figuring out just how a character might look. It even ended up, this is a couple of pages from the Pixar at the Museum of Modern Art in 2005. We had a big exhibit in New York City, and some of my sculptures actually made it into that exhibit. So I'm an exhibited artist at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is fantastic. Another story I'll tell you another time of how Jerome, Ranf, Bill Cohn, and I had the whole of MoMA to ourselves to look at while we were preparing for that. Absolutely wonderful. In any case, sculpting, and I finally came upon this, which I liked. This is a little wet clay sculpture, only about as big as my fist, and it very much takes from Trnka's influence, and it happens to look like my cousin Ivan. Which amuses me no end, although you don't know who that is. So I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to try and bring this character to life? Of course, the key thing, though, as Ed so rightly said, is story. Pixar was all about story, and rightly so. And I didn't have a single story with a human character in it. So I sat down and started writing ideas. This is, in fact, the first page of 4 or 5 pages of first concepts that I immediately sketched out or just wrote down of what on earth it might be about. And you can see some interesting ideas in there, including playing chess with himself and he cheats. That idea was there as a concept from the beginning, but there were all kinds of other things I was interested in, like how does this old man cross the road, feeding ducks in the park, shouting and complaining out of his window, all the various things that the character might do. And the key idea for me was, because I knew a little bit about some of the technique and technology, was, oh, this is going to be a very, very difficult project. We're going to do a human being. Let's just do one. And all of these ideas are to do with one character, because if we try to do 2, we're going to die. So my mind was set on figuring out a way of doing just a story with one character. And I figured out ideas. This is one of them, up and down, about the old man going up and down an elevator and using the stairs as a slide, feeding the ducks in the park. There's an antagonism against a duck that eventually takes his dinner, his sandwich. But in the end, I came back to inspiration from this man, who was my mother's father, my grandfather. This is Engineer Antonín Kříž, a wonderful man, very determined. He was the first of 10 children, grew up in poverty in a small Moravian village, and he had a work ethic like you wouldn't believe. He had perfect grades in high school. I've seen them in his report card. Everything perfect. He was an engineer of railway locomotive braking systems. He invented a revolutionary brake. And he was serious, moral. He had a huge temper. And he was an extremely determined person. And as a child, I used to watch him playing solitaire chess, which I could never understand how he managed to play chess against himself, because I thought you'd always know what you're going to do next. But he was someone who enjoyed thinking hard, thinking deeply, thinking seriously. And there was something so appealing. And when I was in grammar school in England, I had a great friend who was a chess player who explained to me that chess is actually not an intellectual pursuit at all. It's a fight. It's a fight, even at the highest level. And so there's going to be drama. A nice fight is what we want in a story. So I thought, okay, let's try and make a story about an old man who plays chess in the park against himself. Now, when I hear myself say that, that's not an elevator pitch. you don't immediately get a sign of saying, oh, of course, that's a great idea. And it's forever to the credit of Ed and John and everyone else at Pixar that they let me even try. Because on paper, it doesn't make any sense, does it? So I worked out thumbnails and did a full storyboard and story reel, trying to get the story right, working on an old man playing chess with himself. And frankly, this first attempt, which I can't show you right now, was a disaster. It was just terrible from beginning to end. I didn't know what I was doing. It didn't have any shape. It was just a mess. So I remember still today sweating through that pitch and John looking at me and saying, okay, and then leaving. And then later on, amazingly, I was told to try again. Nobody kicked me out. I was given the opportunity to have another go. So I worked very, very hard to rework the style and to work very hard on the story with help. And eventually ran through the whole thing that became, I actually dug up some of the paper storyboards that I have here, all on paper. There's just leafing through these makes me want to weep. It's beautiful. The show was successful. Everyone liked it, and we got a green light to celebrate. At some point, Joe Ranft made this beautiful drawing of Geri playing John. He was very nervous giving me this because it wasn't a very politic thing to do. Karen Dufilo joined us as the producer, and we became friends. Ed Catmull brought her in, and a woman of infinite energy and can-do attitude. And of course, Karen went on to produce Ralph Eggleston's For the Birds, which also won an Oscar, and ran the Pixar Shorts group for a number of years. And years later, we teamed up again when I went to Google to do, I was asked to invent something new at Google, and I called Karen to join us at what would become Google Spotlight Stories. But that's another story. You see that I like to digress. One of the things we got right from the very beginning was the music, which I still love to this day. Gus Viseur and his orchestra, Flambé Montalbanese, this whole musette style of music, so French, so evocative, so happy and sad at the same time. Everyone loved it, and we just did a needle drop for that, making the show all around it. We had to make a short all about facial expressions. It was just close-ups of an old guy sitting at a table. So we knew we'd have to do a lot to make a digital puppet that was expressive. So right at the beginning, I was asked to put together a reference for the range of expression that Geri goes through to get a sense of what we needed to achieve technically. And this certainly scared the technical guys, because page after page, it was an awful lot of very emotive stuff. And of course, I did the whole thing also in sculptures, filling a room full of sculptures that also, as reference, were useful to the modelers to know how far we wanted to go. So from this initial design, Jerome Ranft scaled it up to something we could use in this process. I wanted to be more angular, more sculptural. And I remember being an absolute pain with Jerome. I would noodle him, say a little bit more like this, a little more like that. The thing that I was going for was this interesting style of, this is a poster from, I think, 1928 for a Soviet film called 5 Minutes That Shocked the World. There's a picture of this capitalist who I believe is actually Joseph Chamberlain, the father of Neville Chamberlain, who sold my country to Hitler. But that's another story entirely. Anyway, I was noodling Jerome, and finally he picked up the tool and he put it in my hand and says, "Why don't you do it?" Which I later understood was the smartest thing. He was such a professional. He really understood how to deal with an inexperienced young director. And so together we sculpted this reference, which he then made even bigger to make a larger version that we could digitize in this old-fashioned way with a Polhemus digitizer. And as you, by the way, notice that you go from left to right in this image, from this original sketch of a sculpture through this, where he sort of dies. The life is getting sucked out of this character, isn't it? He's getting deader and deader until he becomes a robot on the right here. And our job, of course, is to put him into the machine and reanimate him and bring him back to life so that he can be a character in a story. This is the great difficulty of computer animation. So lots of sculpting. And once we had those sculptures, lots of Photoshop work and reference, and all about telling people how it should look. And of course, the same was true of the hands. I actually have a hand here. This is a version of a hand that we have. And very complex shape. This kind of shape was just not possible to make at the time without tremendous pain in computer animation. And of course, it reminds those of us who are techie and nerdy and geeky and are interested in the history of computer animation of this. In 1972, Ed Catmull and Fred Park at the University of Utah made a computer animated hand. That was the name of the short film that they made under Ivan Sutherland, which ended up in the Library of Congress. It has its own Wikipedia page. And it was the very first time that a computer animated hand had been created out of polygons. Ed digitized his own left hand, a casting of his left hand. And I think that's a Phong shading he's got there. Ed, of course, became the president of feature animation, both at Disney and Pixar, ultimately. Pixar and Disney, I should say. And Fred Park is or was still a professor of computer graphics at Texas A&M. this was a tremendous inspiration to early work that I'd seen. Now, what Ed did sometime later with Jim Clark, who founded Silicon Graphics, was come up with a system of surface definition called subdivision surfaces, the Catmull-Clark algorithm. And I can't tell you enough about that, mostly because I don't know enough about that. But it was a way of creating smooth surfaces, beginning with coarse ones. And the guy who came to Pixar to make that a reality was Tony DeRose, PhD, UC Berkeley, 10 years professor of computer science at University of Washington, over 50 scientific papers. And Ed brought him in to bring back this technique of subdivision surfaces, which is now the standard way that we all do things in our medium. But of course, back then it was happening and new. It was coming back. Tony developed and improved on Ed and Jim's invention from 20 years earlier. But Tony and Ed were sure that subdivision surfaces time had come, and Geri's game was the testing ground, the forcing function for that. The idea of making a short film was partly, at least, to make Pixar be able to do human beings, because there are only so many films you can make with about bugs and about toys. We needed to be able to do humans. And actually, there's a fantastic thing on the Khan Academy. If you want to actually know about subdivision surfaces, just look up subdivs, and there's from a few years ago, Tony's introducing them. And Geri's game was the first definitive work using this new technique. Here is Geri's head modeled and rendered as a subdivision surface. That's making the shapes, and Tony worked closely with Paul Akeley, our very driven rigger. Using reference, this is just one of, I don't know, tens of dozens of pages of reference material that I attempted to communicate the kind of flexibility and expressiveness that we were going for. I asked for the earth and received a remarkable amount of it. Paul, he put together the rigging for much of the face and the hands. Lots of animatable variables in our animation system, Menvi. They were called AVARs. I asked him afterwards how many there were, so he did the numbers. There were 360 controls in Geri's face alone. There were 110 in each hand, 196 in his body, 10 in each shoe. It was crazy. And only someone as crazy as Paul Akeley could do it. As he said, 2 words: oh my, what have we done? Quentin King actually did the controls for Geri's hair, which is the picture you can see here. There were, I think, 128 control rods, each of which there were something over 1,000 different controls for doing hair, which we didn't know how to do. It was a wonderful, wonderful time of everyone trying and working very, very, very hard. And of course, the idea was that we would test subdivision surfaces on this short film and bring it into production, but it became so successful so quickly that it was immediately put into the current film that was being made at the time, which was Pixar's future was once again riding on, A Bug's Life. Subdivs were so much better to use than the previous methods of non-uniform rational B-splines or NURBs, that they were immediately put into production. And I think Francis, there on the left of the screen, was the first character modeled with subdivs. And I believe Heimlich, who's behind him, if I may be wrong about this, was still an old NURBS model and was notoriously, hideously difficult to animate. But it was very clear that this technique was going to make a profound difference for everybody. Flick, that you can see there, was modeled by my old friend Damir Fikovic, who spent long hours modeling him under the watchful eye of Bob Pauly. And I believe he had to remodel him in subdivs after he'd already done it with work. Anyway, Geri's game was also released as the short, of course, with the main feature. Let's get back to how we made it. The other big thing, the other big innovation technically in Geri's game was cloth. This is also back then an unsolved problem. These days we don't think about it. It's been understood and figured out. It's a push button, anyone can do it. Back then there were only a couple of guys in the world who were doing the right stuff to be able to simulate the dynamics of cloth, because you can't have the animators spending all their time figuring out how to fold a piece of digital surface in order to make clothing look good, and humans do wear clothes. So we had to make that automatic. Along came Michael Cass to do the cloth dynamic simulation. Mathematician, Princeton, MIT, Stanford. He ended up 18 years at Pixar. He's what one might call an overachiever, one-time US juggling champion, ice dancing champion, an amazing guy in many ways. I think he's currently the senior distinguished engineer at NVIDIA, software architect of the NVIDIA Omniverse, relevant to all the talk about metaverse these days. So he's building the open metaverse with another Pixar thing, which is the universal scene description language, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, Michael sweated through the hard math that hardly anyone else in the world was doing at the time to do cloth dynamic simulations so that the animators could concentrate on just making Geri act while the cloth did what it should do. And so he'd work on the math, we'd do a render overnight, we'd come in the morning, and something would be on the screen. Sometimes it looked like concrete, sometimes it looked like jello, sometimes it looked like porridge. It was like any other new thing in computers and computer animation. It was a difficult slog, but we had the best people working on it, and Michael got his way through it until finally we had cloth-looking dynamic simulation. It was great. And at about this time, you know, we figured out what terrible tailors we were. Of course, the tradition is you define your character in this T pose so that you can then have all your angles on all the limbs work properly for the animators. And that's how we made the jacket. And we found that once we had the cloth working like cloth should, when Geri had settled with his jacket on and moved into his first pose of whatever the shot was, there was all this extra cloth under his arms that shouldn't be there because, of course, real jackets aren't made that way at all. It doesn't make any sense. And we were tearing our hair out about how to do this and had to rebuild the jacket. And about this time, Steve Jobs came by and asked, how's it going? And I said, well, the simulation software is finally working and the cloth is really good, and showing us what lousy tailors we are. And I explained all this stuff, and he listened very patiently, and he said, yeah, I said, we built the jacket all wrong. We had no idea how to tailor a jacket. And I said, okay, so he said, so what you really need is a tailor. I said, oh, I guess we do. Yeah, and he said, oh, I know a tailor. I said, oh, who? He said, Giorgio Armani. And Steve was genuinely ready to pick up the phone and call Giorgio Armani to teach us how to tailor a jacket. And to this day, I'm kicking myself that I didn't immediately jump on that and say, yes, please, Steve, please call Giorgio Armani. That's another indication of how dumb I am. But Steve, it was a brilliant insight into the nature of Steve Jobs, who always would go for the very best you could think of to help with any problem. So that was shocking. But in the end, we ended up making Geri's game. It was a wonderful experience, and Giorgio Armani actually did feature, because the tuxedo I'm wearing at the Oscars there is a Giorgio Armani tuxedo. We did the qualifying run at Limley Theatres in Hollywood to make the Geri qualified for submission for the Oscars. As soon as I saw Alexander Petrov's The Mermaid, beautiful film, in hand moving oil painting on glass, just incredible artistry. You know, we couldn't win. But it turns out we did, and received the award from Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who'd just about to win another one for Good Will Hunting, as did Robin Williams that time. I was kissed by Cher at the Vanity Fair party. A lot of wonderful things happened. Geri's game was released with A Bug's Life in theaters, and only in the US, I believe, not in Europe and the rest of the world. And it was there is the short film on home video in VHS and DVD. And it won many, many awards. We'd had a fantastic festival run, shown in over 100 festivals all over the world: Annecy, Anima Mundi, Zagreb, Hiroshima, Ottawa, LA Film Critics, you name it. And one of my best times was meeting Ray Harryhausen in Hiroshima. But just to show that you can't have everything, when it was shown Spike and Mike's, we ended up with the most boring Spike and Mike's poster ever. I'm happy to report. So you can have all that success, but you can't be super popular and cool at the same time. One other thing that happened to me as that night at the Oscars was that it happened to be my mother's birthday, and my mother was in the Czech Republic at the time, and I said to my mother, "Mummy, Tomáš k narozeninám," which in Czech means, "Mum, this is for your birthday." Everyone was shocked and surprised. Back in the old country, I instantly became a celebrity, and it had a huge effect on my future as a local boy made good in the Czech Republic. That again is another story I wish we had time for. I know we're running out of time. Steve was a big fan. We're gonna try and wrap this up. I'm gonna rush through. It was Steve who in fact greenlit Ratatouille. Geri's game had a big impact within Pixar. It was featured in the 96 and 97 annual reports for investors who got a free VHS DVD. Of course, because of that and what came on, I ended up being able to develop Ratatouille. And it was, as I said, Steve Jobs who greenlit Ratatouille, on which, of course, we had a tailoring department with 22 simulation artists and people actually involved in tailoring. And just by the way, talking of Ratatouille, Brad Bird, when he came to Pixar to develop Incredibles, he told me that it was seeing Geri's game that convinced him that CG, computer graphics, could do human characters, which is one of the reasons why he came up to Pixar to eventually make that great film, The Incredibles. But of course, he was working with designers like Tony Fucilli, Teddy Newton, Lou Romano, and the great sculptor Kent Melton. Fantastic. Geri, of course, made another appearance as the cleaner in Toy Story 2. You can't rush art, voiced by Jonathan Harris. Little snide reference to the film and his as he's pulling open the drawers of his stuff there. A different look. A lot of people in Pixar actually animated on the film. Here you'll see some veterans. Pete Docter animated. Angus MacLean, director of Lightyear. Ben Catmull, Ed Catmull's son. Scott Clark. Some people completely new to animation. There were 19 animators on this 3.5-minute short film. And one of my tasks as the director was to try and make it all seem consistent, where sometimes animators had just one shot. In the world of computer graphics, it made the huge difference. Everything's changed since then. This is Tony Adoro's, Michael Casson, Tien Trong's paper for SIGGRAPH. Open subdivision surface technology is now the norm. Pixar had to take this technology out to the world, and in 2005, Maya adopted it as their standard. And people like Bill Paulson at Pixar put it out there. And later on at Google, when I was doing Spotlight Stories, we implemented, I didn't, it was the GPU-based implementation of subdivs was on a phone and on mobile devices, and we're able to make many more short films. To me personally, the thing that matters most is just the love that the film has gotten. There's been so much fan art, Legos, cakes, sculptures, DIY cosplay, on and on, drawings. And if you look at YouTube, there are any number of remakes that some of them from 15 years ago, some of them from just 2 months ago. It seems that time and time again, Geri has somehow become a meme. It is a form in a story that has appealed to so many people so often. And I do remember being astonished at how this strange little short film about the imagination of an old man who plays chess in the park against himself was appealing even to small children, which is something I, as a young director, really didn't expect. So it just goes to show you never quite know what's going to happen with something that you release out into the world. I don't know where to stop this. It just keeps on going, and it's gratifying that not only do people like to remake it, but also to well, to reference it I think a couple of years ago, IMDb had the top 10 chess films. And it was listed, Geri's game was listed as one of the top, never mind Searching for Bobby Fischer, it was listed as a chess movie. Of course, the chess in the film is nonsense, but it was at one point listed as number 2 after the great Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal, which features Death playing chess against the lead character. So wonderful things. So that's the end of my story for you today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to your questions. I'm sorry it was so long.
Not nearly long enough, Jan. Oh my gosh, what brilliance. This we could listen to for days. Feel free. A couple of quick things just to explore the story more. I mean, the story behind the story is brilliant. But when you winnow down to this little moment, this idea of a man sitting in the park playing chess with himself, a little old man, and it strikes me as a sort of a battle of wills. And at times you catch yourself, you get the hook that up front that it is him playing himself, but then you get so immersed in it, it's pitting against, yes, himself, but I still look at it as like, it's this great testament to this battle of wills internally. Talk a little bit about that, and the movements, the expressions were so evocative of that. Relate the technology to the artistry in the storytelling.
Of course, the technology, Mindy, you're so right, was in service of the art. Trying to make it possible for us to tell this very strange story about imagination, and to make it possible to make an entertaining story that really is just close-ups of an old man playing chess. This was the concept of the story always struck me as clever. That you could figure out a way to make this one character into 2, and then have a conflict between them to drive a story. And it certainly, for better or worse, labeled me with at Pixar for forever as being the guy with the European sensibility. But really, it was very important for us to do all that very, very hard work, technically and practically, to support the acting. And so all that innovation was really there to make a digital puppet that the animators could act through, because of course animators are actors, aren't they?
Yeah.
And whatever medium you're working with in animation, you're trying to produce something that's acting on the screen. And I was lucky in being someone with an animation background and a technical background to be able to pull these things together, and to be able to talk to the PhDs about the mathematics, and to be able to talk to the animators about the acting.
When you spoke about your European sensibilities, well, thank goodness for those. And I did not realize, and I'm so glad you covered the fact that this really did open up the doors for Ratatouille and for Incredibles and so many other things. But, those European sensibilities are all over Ratatouille. My goodness, thank goodness.
Yeah, I've always been a little bit of a Francophile, I guess. And when I came up with the idea for Ratatouille, the basic concept, which is an elevator pitch, Rat wants to become a chef. That's something you can say, and okay, that I remember pitching that to the Brain Trust, and everyone laughed, and that was that. You understand exactly what the problem is right away.
Right.
Where else but in France are you going to set a story about a rat wanting to become a chef? That's where the culture of cooking really, really exists.
Yeah. No, it's great. And your background is certainly computer science, but this level of artistry, you spoke about your influences. Talk a little bit about other areas that you've explored personally, creatively, and how important things like SIGGRAPH have been to your career.
Oh, sure. Well, SIGGRAPH. I think I first came to the United States in 1991 I think that was SIGGRAPH in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. And that's where I first bumped into Lauren Carpenter of Pixar. I was rather shocked that he was missing a finger of one hand when I shook his hand because there was a rocketry accident. And he was my technical hero, is the guy who brought fractals, mountains, and surfaces in his beautiful piece of Vol Libre to these guys at Pixar who sort of created the possibilities of all this imagery. Were amazing. Back then it was the burgeoning of a new field. Something new was beginning, and you could feel it every time you went to SIGGRAPH. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people showing up to this conference as everything was just exploding. It was very, very, very exciting. Everything was new. I was delighted to be able to bring to this new medium this sort of old-fashioned storytelling thinking. Because, and I was delighted to join Pixar, where it was all about story. That was the religion of Pixar, you might say. That's really ultimately what matters, because the development of computer graphics had shown you can be amazing in the pictures, but if they're not interesting from a story perspective, what can you do? That's not going to bring an audience to what you're seeing. So I was raised on traditional old-fashioned fairy tales in Central Europe. My mother would read to me from books that again, I could go on for hours about those. And in a very serious way, I have to say, I think the person who I am was made by those early experiences of the stories I was told as a child. I think that's true of all of us. And it's this understanding of the importance of stories to, well, I'm embarrassed as a British educated person, to our souls. I think that's so much to really express our humanity and to understand what it is to live as a person in the world through stories. This is what great stories communicate. This is what great fairy tales are about. And so it's something I always come back to.
It's evident all throughout Geri's game. I mean, that really speaks very effectively, this sense of humanity. And in the midst of this charming scene, it doesn't tip into, sugary charm. There's a pathos and a European sensibility.
In the end, it's both funny and it's a bit tragic, isn't it? He's there on his own, and yet he's happy. And I hope that I hope one day to be a mad old man like that.
Something for us all to aspire to. Let's see. Did you ever want to see Geri go off and do other things, carrying on in like a series, or is there more you wanted to explore with the character of Geri? He did have a few appearances, and
he had a little bit of a life, yes. Yeah. And
is
as
there
I said,
more?
I'm very sorry. I'm very, very gratified, really, to my surprise, how he's been embraced by so many people. This little story seems to be something that everyone can understand, and sort of the remaking, the fan thing is so wonderful, because it obviously tells us that the story touches people,
yeah,
and at least amuses them. And so I to be honest, always wanted to make Geri's game, and then move on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And for it to just be something that people can enjoy on its own. I never had any great plans for sort of taking that character further. No.
That's a true storyteller. Thank you for also mentioning Trinka and his influence on your work and on this film in particular. I think that's a storyteller, a visual storyteller who doesn't get his global due.
I couldn't agree more.
Talk a bit more about his work and where it influences you still today.
Now I will get European on you. Look, I'm from this storied Central European country that was once Czechoslovakia, that is now the Czech Republic. And the history of that country in the 20th century is very tragic. But I grew up in a communist totalitarianism. I was a little child then, I should say. I luckily grew up in the what we call the Free West. But back then, in those days, there were very few artists who were allowed to work. There was a handful, maybe this many people, who were sanctioned by the communist state, who were allowed to publish in children's literature, right? Not a free place at all. And because it was so difficult to live in those circumstances, the great artists who cared retreated to the edges of society. And children's books were one of those areas where you could be a little bit more traditional and a little bit more expressive and a little bit freer, not so much under the spotlight of the censors and the government and that oppressive apparatus. And what that weirdly had, that effect, meant that we got, as children, the very best artists in the country were working, illustrating children's books. And I think Trnka must have illustrated maybe 200 books, you know, without exaggeration, just a tremendously prolific artist. And like all great artists like him, he had several different styles, but they were all recognizably his. And some of the greatest artists in film and in music and in writing beat a path to his door over the years. And of course, he became, for the communist Czech government, one of the few things that was exportable to the West. And it was a source of hard currency. So he was allowed to work. But without the politics, that aside, he was someone steeped in the tradition of puppetry. He began as a puppeteer before he turned to filmmaking and illustration. And so he's in the direct lineage of hundreds of years of Central European tradition in storytelling for not just children, for all of us, with characters that are puppets. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much of that area that we don't link to animation. That's, maybe we should save that for another lecture, another program here. But there's a tremendously rich background in puppetry, yes, that has inspired brilliant animation. And do you feel a bit of a legacy in carrying that forward in the work you do?
Funnily enough, one of my COVID projects was to direct a short puppet live-action film for a good friend of mine at Google, a 14-minute short film with live puppetry, which is something I haven't done before, and I tremendously enjoyed, and I was very happy to do. Thinking also about this tradition and legacy from my old country. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, incredible influence, and we as an audience are grateful for that, because we get to still continue to enjoy Geri's game 25 years hence. Did you think at the time it was going to have this much life?
I had no idea. Of course, Mindy, there are so many things I had no idea.
That's the joy of it, right?
Right.
Seeing it unfold, yeah. And it speaks to the timelessness of it. So we are grateful. Thank you so much, Jan, for your brilliance. We look forward to seeing you back with even more in coming films.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you once again for giving me an excuse to rummage through my attic and to go on this sentimental journey with you. I really, really appreciate it.